Welcome to Gleaning and Gathering. I'm your host, Eric Heimlich, and today I've been chewing on some things this morning from my reading with George Muller again. I was just struck by the thought that God doesn't always supply at the time or by the means that we think He will. I think that people often love to quote the George Muller stories of God's provision, and God came through just in time, but that wasn't always the case. And there were some situations in 1838 in particular that he went through some trials of his faith. He had just come through a period of time where he was out of church for almost 6 months. He was sick, apparently, and he was dealing with some things up until about May of 1938. They were reduced to nothing, and he experienced failures in answer to prayer. He records that regarding the necessary rent that was due on September the 29th, 1838. And it was that situation really that caused them as a group to reevaluate how they saved for rent. At that time, they were paying their rent every 6 months. And so here's this large bill that's coming due and they don't have the money to pay it. And it caused them to reevaluate. And also later in the same story, they reevaluated how they paid their bills as far as what they needed for their daily necessities. Up to that point, they had been running a balance of sort. It wasn't a credit card, but they paid off their bill weekly, sometimes monthly, to various people. And so they would have these bills that they were running, and then they would come up due and they didn't have the money to pay it. And so as a result of those very specific privations, God teaches them lessons and they learn. But not only does George Muller learn these lessons, but there are other people who are learning with them. I love the quote. As he's wrapping up 1838, he says, "The chief blessing from this is that several brothers who earn their bread by the labor of their hands have learned to lay by their weekly rent." As I read that, I thought, wow, isn't that God, just like God? That's an important lesson right there. That's wisdom gained. Dave Ramsey would be proud. When we learn those kind of lessons, those are lessons for life, not just lessons for, how do we get through this moment. And so, I was thinking about that in relation to my situation. I have been through certainly not the same kinds of things that George Muller has gone through. I'm not of that level, of that caliber. But I've been through some privations in my life, some situations and circumstances where I thought, how are we going to make this? And there have been moments along the way when, frankly, just to confess, I felt like God failed me. I felt like that I had prayed for something, I had looked for something, I had asked for something, and God didn't give it to me. And there are question marks that come naturally if you're a person who's asking those questions. And I think that we should be asking those questions. I was listening to a podcast later on this morning as I was working out and listening to Kara Powell, who is a researcher on young people and Christianity. And she was being interviewed in this podcast by Carrie Nyhoff. And there was an important point. She said, we should not be teaching with statements when a question will suffice. And I thought that was just brilliant. How many times did Jesus, when he has someone coming to him and they're asking a question, "Lord, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus doesn't answer the question immediately. Instead, he responds with a question. "Why do you call me good? What does the law say?" Again and again, Jesus answers questions with questions. And she said, there are 3 questions that we should be constantly asking, especially with young people. And these are the questions. This is what hit me. What is happening? So as we're looking at our life, as we're looking at circumstances in the world, what is happening? And we need to get clear on that. We need to actually be aware of what is going on in our situation. And the second question is, what does it mean? What is happening? What does it mean? And then the third question, what is God inviting us into? What is it that God is doing in this situation? And Muller did that with his team. It provided an important, really inflection point. At this point, he's bearing all these burdens by himself in prayer. He's praying, and everybody else, staff-wise, otherwise, they don't know what's going on. And it reached a point in 1938 that he had to share. The needs were so great that he felt that he needed to share these. And so he did. And one sister said, I'm going to give up my salary for a year. Another person gave some money as a result. And they were all pitching in and helping, even though many of them were in great need themselves. And he shares this need with them. And there's a work that begins to happen. Not only does God do something in Muller's own heart, but as they're looking at what's happening, they're asking, what does this mean? And then seeing what God is inviting them into, they realize that there are some important course corrections that need to be made. I think that's important for us. If our idea of how this should work is, well, here's the plan. God's gonna provide for this now because obviously we came up with this plan. It's a good plan, and I'm sure God will provide for it. There you go. It really does beg the question then, when he doesn't, were we wrong? Is this something that God wants us to prevail in faith for? What is happening? And what does it mean? And then what are we supposed to see as a result of this? For them, in this situation, not only does he help them make some important course corrections as an organization, but also the chief blessing from this, he says, at the end of the ordeal, is that several brothers who earn their bread by labor of their hands have learned to lay by their weekly rent. They've learned from this, and they said, okay, I'm going to save up too so that I don't have to be in this position. And I think that these are the kinds of questions that, as we are working with young people in particular, we are facing some really challenging days ahead. Young people today face an uncertain world. I don't know if you recognize it or not, but our economy is collapsing. And get ready, because you haven't seen anything yet. The employment landscape is rapidly changing. Large numbers of layoffs just announced here recently, and you're about to see that cascade as banks fail, and the situation is going to get more dire. And so developing young men and women of character, of courage, of competence, with tools in their toolbox is absolutely essential. We need to be teaching them how to ask good questions and not just giving them rote answers. Because many of them are going to face questions in their lifetime that we've never had to face. What is the Christian response to chips being inserted into human brains? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Now, most people would say it's a bad thing, but if we have the opportunity to be able to help people who are quadriplegics now to be able to walk again, isn't that a good thing? What about IVF? In vitro fertilization. Should Christians be participating in that? We believe life is a good thing, right? So is that a good thing? Is that something that Christians should be part of? What about end-of-life issues? In a third world country, you don't have the problem of, how long do you keep people alive? You either live or you don't. But now we have the opportunity with machines to keep people alive almost indefinitely. And so when is enough enough? And yet, where is that point where life-saving measures are no longer really legitimate? And when are we just pulling the plug to save money? Those are real issues. And there are many, many more questions that Christians will disagree about the answers to. Questions that have biblical principles, certainly, that could be applied to them, but it doesn't necessarily follow 100% of the time that your answer is the correct answer. And so we need young people who are grappling with questions and who have the skills in their toolbox to think critically, to be able to look at the world and say, what is happening? What does it mean? And what is God inviting us into? she pointed out in that same podcast that the average church today is pastored by someone who is 60 plus. And so in the next really 5 to 10 years, probably, we're going to see this whole wave of pastoral retirement, people who are no longer going to be in active ministry. And where are the replacements? Where are the people who are going to replace just the churches that are already established? Not even talking about planting new churches. One of the statements that she made, in no other industry are young people infantilized like in the church. We give a young man a rifle at the age of 18 and send him off to drive a tank or do something else halfway around the world. And yet, if a young man's not at least 35 years of age, he can't really lead a church. And I understand maturity issues. I really do. And having been one of those kids that was trying to help start a church at the age of 19, I recognize the challenges with that. And thank God for every gray hair that I have now and the wisdom that has come with it. But we need ministry with and by young people, not just for young people. And I think too many times we've just given them the wrong message. Oh yes, we want them to deny themselves, take up their cross and follow Jesus, but here's a volleyball. Just go play and have a good time and try not to get yourself in trouble. And that's the bar. That's the bar we've set for them. And it's kind of this whole mixed message. They've got more energy than we do. They've got wonderful talents that they want to employ for good. And what do? We tell them to sit down and hush. Another quote that I just love, she said, giving young people a voice without a vote is not a seat at the table. It's a high chair off to the side. And too many times that's what we've done. We've not given young people a seat at the table, whether it's we may feel threatened or whether it's because we just don't think that they're intelligent enough to actually have a voice in the conversation. But many times we've just given them a high chair off to the side. Someday, you too can be part of this discussion, but right now, just hush. But we need to help them think through the questions of identity and of belonging and of purpose if we're going to truly make disciples. And it's one of the reasons why I am so pumped up about the Nehemiah Discipleship Program. Putting Kaylin in this year as the deputy director is not just kind of a figurehead role. Like, in a lot of ways, my daughter is primed and ready to develop NDP to a level that I never could develop it. And frankly, she's better qualified than I am in a lot of ways to be able to lead this. And so I'm going to help provide direction and be as helpful as I can along the way, but I am along for the ride in a lot of ways, because the vision really of doing this in a multi-site satellite kind of way and developing leaders who will have a vision for how they can do this and bless the local church, that's her. That's completely her. I didn't come up with that. And what I see is that as we empower young people to take the gifts that God's given them and put those gifts to use, put them to work in these areas, and let them do hard things. Let them sink their teeth in, so to speak, whatever metaphor you want to use. Let them get in the game. Church, there's an opportunity there that we are so missing many times. Because the message that young people are getting too many times is, yeah, I think you might be able to take up the offering. I think you might be able to, help volunteer to park cars or something. But yeah, I don't really think you're ready for that. When the reality is, if you wait until they are ready, it's too late. It's just like in training kids. If you wait to teach your kids how to work until they are actually helpful in that work, good luck. It's when you get them involved at a very early age, when they're still a nuisance, when they're still just, they're just in the way. That's when they begin to develop the little muscles that are necessary later. And if you don't do it then, there is a lost opportunity. And so it has to start early. And I remember in my own life, our family went to the local nursing home service on Sunday afternoons, and there's no people from the church just lining up to go there and help with that. And yet our church had a nursing home service regularly, and so our family volunteered to go, and we would sing. And many times there was no one there to speak, no pastor that was coming to lead that. There was one other older gentleman sometimes who came, but he had another nursing home that he helped in too, and so Brother Unkefer, when he wasn't available, there was just no one to speak. And so I remember at the age of 10, our family was there to sing a special, and I took the message that our pastor had preached that morning, written on some paper notes that I had made during that, and I stood up, and as a 10-year-old boy in this nursing home, shared this little gospel truth. And thankfully, most of the people were asleep and couldn't really hear my message anyway, and it really didn't probably make any sense to many of them. And if it did, I don't know if anybody got any help out of it. But you know who did get help out of it? Me. That's where I started. And that's where God began to develop those little muscles in me. And so as I went along, it was about 13 or 14 that I really, in earnest, felt like that God was leading me into this. This was an opportunity that he was opening up in front of me. And God opened up other doors for me to be able to share. And so through that, I was led into this idea, at least, of being involved in ministry in a more comprehensive way. Later went on to Union Bible College and then ended up working in inner city Indianapolis. And as they say, the rest is history. But it started for me as a 10-year-old boy in a nursing home. And I don't know where it's going to start for many of the young people that are in your church, but I believe it's going to start, and it's going to start early if it's going to begin. And I believe it has to. One of the things that I'm super excited about right now is we've got 3 young people from our congregation that I'm working with on a weekly basis right now, besides our own children. And so they come on Thursdays and they work here at the office. And right now they're helping me getting ready for this Longing for the Light event. And it's beautiful. And I so appreciate their help, and their gifts are emerging. And we've done some personality tests and learning about their skills and trying to feed them books, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and other kinds of resources that are helping to grow them as individuals. And it's just so exciting to see them emerge and develop as leaders. And they're doing some great work and helping us along the way. But it's a double win. Not only are we getting work done, but we're also developing leaders in the process. And so yesterday, we had a bush hog that had broken, the blades on it had broken, and the support arms for the blades had broken. And so Peter Branch took 1/4-inch steel plates and fashioned a new arm system on that, and then created new blades that he balanced so that it wouldn't go everywhere, and got it completely working in a little less than 8 hours. It was such a blessing to have him use the skills that he has as a metal worker here on the farm, and to be able to develop talent like that within our local congregation. And we have a vision for that. We have a vision for what God's going to do through them in the future. We have a church, but we also have a farm, and the opportunity to be able to develop young people that are seeing that as skills to be used in a context and to do good work is just so exciting to me. And we've got a long way to go to get it dialed in and really happening, but we're on the journey. And I just want to throw that vision out to you. I don't know where you're at exactly, but there are young people that are around you. There are people in your church whose gifts are just going to pot right now. They're being completely underutilized. And I think that many times the reason we have exhausted pastors and empty pews is that, pastors are trying to do individually what the church was designed to do collectively. What God has intended for us as pastors, teachers, leaders to do is to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. That's the work that we need to be doing. It's the work of equipping. And it's as that equipping happens that then those saints are unleashed for the work of service, for the edifying of the body of Christ, as it says there in Ephesians. And so I just want to challenge you to think about that, chew on it. It's what I'm chewing on this morning. It's what I'm gleaning. And so I just wanted to stop and share that with you. Hope it's a blessing to you for gleaning and gathering. God bless.